All right, welcome to Leftist Read-Along. Let me do an audio check real quick. Make sure it's all good. Test, 1, 2. Audio is good. All right, we may commence. All right, you already know what this is. It's a weekly read-along. Feel free to read the description and follow the links if you like. This is for information and personal growth purposes only, fully educational. Let's get going. So today we'll be starting with the article, Claudia Karina 2024 statement, Democrats voting uncommitted and abandoning Biden and sending a powerful message, by Claudia and Karina 2024 campaign, March 5th, 2024. The following statement was issued by the PSL's Claudia de la Cruz, Karina Garcia presidential campaign. The Claudia de la Cruz, Karina Garcia 2024 presidential campaign supports the growing movement of people who are sending a message of rejection to Genocide Joe at the voting booth. Many Democrats who voted for Biden in 2020, particularly in the Arab and Muslim communities, have already declared they will abandon Biden this year. Now there is a movement of hundreds of thousands to vote uncommitted in the primary elections or to leave the top of the ticket blank. This effort, only a few weeks old, has highlighted how Biden's facilitation of the genocide will not go unpunished and already become a major source of anxiety for the administration. In the February 27th Michigan primary, over 100,000 registered Democrats went to the polls to vote uncommitted, and they undoubtedly spoke for a much larger group. They sent a clear message: support for the genocide will lead to Biden losing a state that is central to his path to victory in November. Our campaign and the PSL call on those who are voting in the Democratic primary to not vote for Biden, vote uncommitted, none of the above, or where that is not possible, leave the top of the ticket blank. The strength of this vote serves as a register of the deep anger that exists among people who typically vote for Democrats. It is part of a broader movement in solidarity with Palestine that has a remarkable effect on public opinion. Massive marches have taken place in major cities across the country. Politicians are disrupted wherever they go. Opposition to the Israeli regime's crimes is appearing everywhere in society, creating major fault lines in every institution. Each tactic builds towards the same ultimate end, and the electoral movement is another arena to show our power. We encourage all those who have had enough with the Democratic Party's empty promises, genocidal warmongering, and anti-people agenda, and who know that the Republicans offer no alternative, to take the next step and abandon the Democratic Party altogether. Regardless of whatever small inroads progressives have made into it here and there, as an institution and as a party, the real power inside the Democratic Party will always serve the war machine and Wall Street, and that is why they totally back Israel. We encourage everyone who is casting an uncommitted vote in the Democratic primaries to become committed participants in the struggle for a free Palestine. Take to the streets to prevent Israel from going forward with its invasion of Rafah. Support the BDS movement to punish all institutions that facilitate apartheid. Our real power lies not in the voting booth, but what each of us does every day to build that kind of movement. And we invite you to join the movement for socialism. The millionaires and billionaires control the two establishment parties throughout campaign donations, lobbyists, personal influence, and the promise of lucrative jobs. We need a movement and a party to fight for the interest of the working class and to fight for a whole new system that stands with the Palestinian people and all oppressed people. That's the kind of message you can send by voting socialist in November and by joining a socialist movement that is organizing year-round in neighborhoods and workplaces nationwide. All right, so my thoughts, my quick analysis, my opinions on this article right here is, 100% agree. What the Democratic and Republican Party are exercising is a ratchet effect. A ratchet effect that is systemic and that is fed by the greed of capitalism and the Western imperialism. To quickly explain, what they do is they give you two crappy options, whichever you want to consider being worse, doesn't matter. If you're a Democrat, you're going to consider the Republican option to be worse. If you're a Republican, you're going to consider the Democratic option to be worse. But nevertheless, the next election cycle, because you participated in this sham of an election and you voted Democrat or Republic, what you're doing is you are just enabling the two-party system that wants to reassure itself that it still has control of the people. So the next election, they'll put up two worst candidates, and then the next election over, and things will just keep falling behind. It'll be a system that takes one step forward, two steps back, right? They'll throw crumbs at you, telling you that they did progressive things or they did populist things for either party, for either party voter, and then they'll take away rights or put people in more debt, or not, for example, not match with inflation, or for example, not create housing caps, right? Not create programs or invest in the American working class people, like in schools or in jobs, instead sending billions to different nations so that they can buy weapons and just feed the industrial military complex. So what you do by electing, or not even electing, but just rejecting the two-party system and electing or trying to elect parties or candidates that are working class, on the ground candidates, not elitist candidates, but candidates that know what it takes to actually organize and mobilize people. What you do then is you push them to the forefront. For example, a candidate like Claudia de la Cruz, voting for her might not, we hope it does, but might not win her the election, but it'll put her to the forefront, and it'll make it undeniable to the United States establishment that people want this, that people support those kind of programs. And it'll give her more strength and more mobilization resources so that she can organize bigger movements and mobilize more people into fighting for things that they care about. This is historically proven. This is historically proven from the times of the 1900s, when organizers, not politicians, moved the government to provide laws for working class rights, like unions. Leftist organizations like the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, they supported these kinds of organizations a lot. And some of them even led some of these organizations that created working strikes. Without these working strikes, the government would have never moved to create working rights like the 8-hour workday or the 5-day work week, right? Or created overtime, or limited labor to adults instead of child labor that was like 16 hours a day, right? The same with people like MLK. MLK was a great revolutionary priest, activist, and socialist. A lot of MLK's words are hidden, and the nation only sees what the propagandists want you to see about him, that he was a Christian and that he was about peace. But they don't want you to see that he was against Vietnam. They don't want you to see that he was against the capitalist system that leaves so many people in poverty because of greed. But he was a revolutionary, and he led a lot of people, and he was never elected into anything to lead a lot of people. And that's what America needs: people that will rise up to create movements. You will never get these kinds of movements naturally from the two-party system. What they are created to do is to create candidates like AOC, or prop up candidates like Bernie Sanders or Marjorie Taylor Greene, to sheep herd people into the party system so that they can stay subdued, so that they can be controlled within the two-party system. Because once they know you are still playing along and supporting the two-party system, they know that you are still not, you still have not been woken up, or you still have not been red-pilled into understanding how the system is keeps you in perpetual doom and violence, which is what capitalism is. Once you read enough books, once you do the history research enough, you understand that capitalism is a system of violence. It's a system of greed, a system of power that only its primary goals is profits for the elitists at the expense of the working class. Okay, that's my analysis on this article. I'm gonna move on to the next one, making sure that everything looks good here. All right. Women-led resistance. Cool. All right. Take a sip here. Green tea with almond creamer. Great stuff. Great stuff in the winter. All right. Next article. Women-led resistance is a vital part of the Palestinian struggle. By Layla Matar. March 7th, 2024. This is a big article. All right. This article is reprinted from Breaking the Chains magazine. All right, so I'll take my time with this one. The melody is like a gentle breeze of lullaby that instantly evokes goosebumps. The lyrics are phenomenally Arabic, yet strangely indiscernible. The song is a tarwidi, an encoded art form developed by Palestinian women while under British colonialism from 1923 to 1948 to deliver encrypted messages of resistance. During the Great Palestinian Revolt of 1936 to 1939, the British imprisoned an overwhelming number of Palestinian men just for speaking up against their rule. The incarceration severed communication between revolutionaries and their village-dwelling families, leaving behind many women whose brothers, fathers, husbands, and sons were wrongfully imprisoned. In response, Palestinian women developed and deployed Tarweed to secretly transmit instructions for their loved ones' liberation. The encryption in Tarweed involves inverting the last letters of words, repeatedly inserting the letter L, I am in Arabic, or using poetry symbol and analogy with embedded meanings. This process transformed the original message into a gibberish that neither the occupiers nor their translators could comprehend. Women walked along the outside walls of the prisons, delivering messages in serenades that wafted through the worried prison windows. To the occupiers, the sight of Palestinian women strolling and singing folk songs was innocuous, yet it proved instrumental to the prisoners' escape. Nice little picture here. Tarweed survived the Nakba catastrophe, the 1948 ethnic cleansing of Palestine, when at least 700,000 indigenous Palestinians were violently expelled from their homes and homeland by Zionist terrorist militias and Israeli military forces to establish the State of Israel. Today, these folk songs continue, along with traditional food, clothing, storytelling, poetry, and folk dance as markers for Palestinian identity and perseveres of a scattered folk heritage ever threatened by a system of apartheid and genocide. Palestinians within their occupation territories and in the Shatat diaspora continue to pass on these traditions in the ongoing fight against their erasure. Tarweed embodies an aspect of Palestinian history too often bellied by Western mainstream narratives, the vital role of women in the struggle. While these narratives depict Palestinian women as voiceless entities in the inherently patriarchal society, in reality, women-led resistance movements have been an essential part of the more than century-long fight against colonization and oppression in Palestine. The artfulness of Tarweed further highlights women's resourcefulness and ingenuity in this ongoing resistance. Although there are multitudinous examples of Palestinian women's resistance, Fatima Bernawi and Shadia Abu Ghazala are two women who made critical contributions to the struggle for Palestinian liberation. Bernawi, who was born in 1939 and survived the Nakba with her Palestinian mother, reunited with her Nigerian father, who had fought in the 1936 revolt shortly thereafter. She became an active participant and leader in the struggle for freedom. She is the first woman prisoner listed in the records of the Palestinian Women's Prisoners Movement. Shadia Abu Ghazala was one of the early members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, founded in 1967. She led women's military units and was deeply dedicated to the education of the people. Though she died in late 1968, a school named after her in the Gaza Strip was the site of an Israel massacre in December of 2023. Women's leadership in the First Intifada. Palestinian women were a cornerstone of the First Intifada uprising that erupted in December of 1987. After decades of Israeli military occupation and settlement expansion, an Israeli truck collided with a civilian car in Gaza. Killing 4 Palestinians in Gaza proved to be the last straw. Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank mobilized as a united front, catching Israel off guard. Israel responded with a swift and brutal crackdown. Countless Palestinian men were arrested and imprisoned, deported, or killed. Palestinian women quickly stepped in to fill the void and formed the backbone of the uprising. Women from urban cities and traditional villages mobilized as part of the First Intifada, uniting across generations, political factions, and class lines. They organized at the grassroots level, rallying hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in a series of coordinated efforts against the Israeli occupation. Every major Palestinian faction formed a women's committee disguised as a homemaking group because it was illegal to be a member of a political party or student union. Publicly, they called for knitting, cooking, and sewing meetups, but they were secretly planning the Intifada. During the First Intifada, Palestinian women initiated mass political strikes and spearheaded the first mass boycott against Israel. The defiance of Israel's restrictive laws, they found innovative ways in defiance of Israel's restrictive laws, they found innovative ways to provide homegrown alternatives to Israeli goods, setting up backyard gardens and farming cooperatives where women learned to grow their own food. When Israel shut down Palestinian schools and universities to prevent students from mobilizing politically, Palestinian women organized teach-ins in basements and abandoned buildings. They taught themselves medicine and set up teams to provide emergency care to protesters injured by Israeli violence. The civil strikes and coordinated boycotts across Palestine caused such a hit to the economy that Shimon Peres, who was the foreign minister at the time, warned that the economy was in danger. Not surprisingly, the Israeli government doubled down with the intimidation and aggression, imposing daily curfews, ordering mass arrests, and giving Israeli soldiers the infamous orders to break the bones of Palestinians. They cut phone lines in Palestinian towns and villages and placed huge swaths of organizers under house arrest. Palestinian women and the resistance as a whole found ways around every barrier that Israel put in their way. When Israel outlawed the Palestinian flag, women formed knitting circles and made their own flags to fly at demonstrations. When Palestinian women leaders were placed under house arrest, they baked bread and placed communiques in each loaf, which they distributed across villages, towns, and refugee camps undetected by Israeli forces. Women's efforts throughout the First Intifada captured global attention, forcing Israel's staunchest ally, the United States, to withhold its financial support in response to Israel's unwillingness to negotiate. For the first time since 1948, Palestinians brought Israel to its knees, and women were front and center in the movement. The nonviolent groundswell of resistance we know as the First Intifada was cut off at the knees in 1991 by the secretive signing at the White House of the Oslo Accords, an agreement that has worsened the lives of Palestinians to this day. Beyond significantly increasing the numbers of illegal settlements, the Accords created a corrupt political class known today as the Palestinian Authority that actively collaborates with the Israeli occupation to crush resistance. Sumud as a political practice. Samud. I think that's how you say it. To truly understand Palestinian women's tireless fight for Thawabit, their inviolable rights, It helps to invoke the cultural value of Samud, or steadfastness. Samud emerged in full force following the June 1967 War of Naksa, setback or defeat, when Israel annexed and occupied the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, for them tripling its size, more than tripling its size. Since then, Samud has persisted as an ideological theme and political strategy for surviving Israel's colonization, military occupation, and hegemony. All of the active and organized resistance efforts enacted by Palestinians over the years are built upon the foundation of Samud. It is resistance at the psychological level, akin to revolutionary optimism, in as much as it offers an antidote to nihilism at the hands of an oppressive government and ignites faith in the power of the people to usher in the society they deserve. Samud has sustained Palestinians in the face of the severe policies and tactics that Israel has relentlessly employed in an effort to break them. From massacres, expulsions, dispossession, and genocidal wars to the surveillance and control tactics of occupation, checkpoints, barriers, curfews, closed military zones, settlements, settler-only roads, watchtowers, gates, nightly raids, and mass arrests, from denying Palestinians access to water, healthcare, and education, to burning olive trees and bulldozing homes, Israel's goal has been to make the daily lives of Palestinians unbearable and ultimately to force them to leave their homes in search of a better life elsewhere. Samud declares to the occupier, "You may break our bones, but you cannot break our spirit." Samud encompasses a range of everyday acts by which Palestinians fight for the right to exist in their homeland, stay rooted in their culture, and maintain some semblance of normal life under conditions that are anything but normal. The spirit of Samud is on stark display in the enduring commitment of women in the Palestinian territories to creating and nurturing life, even as they are forced to live like prisoners under deplorable conditions. For a society that has faced the threat of extinction for over 75 years, the choice to have and care for children is deeply entwined with survival and solidarity. Performing domestic roles and caring for children in the Palestinian territories, which have been occupied piece by piece since 1948, requires unthinkable levels of willpower, determination, and fortitude. As one journalist, Miriam Ilayada Atlas, put it, the woman who bathes in her two children in the rubble of a building in Gaza is serving a public role. Let me read that. The woman who bathes her two children in the rubble of a building in Gaza is serving a public role. Unfortunately, this women's struggle has been weaponized by Israel and maligned by narrow, decontextualized notions of first world bourgeois feminism that are the handmaid of capitalism. For example, in an article titled, "Why Are So Many of the Victims in Gaza Children?" The Economist attributed the high death toll of children in Gaza since October 7th to the high fertility rate. The article went on to link high fertility rates to poverty and low levels of education. While Gaza does have a high poverty rate, it also has a high rate of literacy among women. While never mentioning the actions of Israel or the Israeli occupying forces, this narrative turns a blind eye to the Gazan women doctors caring for babies who could not survive on life support after the hospital's electricity was cut off, or the Gazan women journalists calmly broadcasting to the world in English amid terrorized shrieks, or the Gazan women trying their best to go in the ruins because they have no other choice. In the village of Nabi Saleh, in the central occupied West Bank, red-tiled roofs of illegal Israeli settlement houses dot the adjacent hilltop. The vast majority of the land in this Area C village is under Israeli military control. Between 2009 and 2016, the villagers organized demonstrations against Israeli settler expropriation of village land and water that were met with fierce and sometimes deadly repression by the Israeli army. Zanaya, a young Palestinian mother from Nabi Saleh, recounts a time she had to throw her 2-year-old daughter out a second-floor window and into the safety of a neighbor's arms when the Israeli army fired a tear gas canister into her home. For Sanya and other Palestinian women, Samud is embodied in the determination to maintain a physical presence on the land, knowing that if they leave, they may never be able to return by their jailers. They may never be able to return by their jailers, the Israelis, and the ability to adapt to adverse and ever worsening conditions. Quote, the important thing is to stay in our house in front of the Israeli soldiers and the occupation, end quote, Zanaya says. Quote, if we stay in our house, it says, we are not afraid of your guns. We stay in our house. We live a normal life. And this is our fortitude under occupation. This is the important thing, end quote. At its core, Samud is existence and resistance. At its core, Samud is existence and resistance. More than a mindset, it is a duty to fulfill the commitment to liberation. It is not blind hope that change will one day come, but an active awareness that only through struggle and solidarity can Palestinians' lives be transformed. And Palestinian women have been its torchbearers. As the intense U.S.-backed Israeli brutality wages on in Gaza, killing tens of thousands of people and displacing millions of their homes, Samud and Tarweed remind us that the Palestinian resistance has a long history. Palestinians have resisted imperialist genocide in countless and creative ways and will continue to do so. All right. First, I need to learn how to say that word properly. Let's see here.
Sumud.
Sumud. All right, Sumud. All right, my analysis or my opinion on this. We read an article on these issues at least weekly now about the horrors, and if you're historically aware of this being a horror that was brought upon Palestinian people through way of occupation, they never accepted this for an Israeli state to be plotted on their land, and they never accepted or wanted violence. Violence is just what happens when you have an occupying force invade you and trying to kick you out of your home, trying to kick your children out of their homes. And this is exactly what happens. People are resisting. Anyone that I think supports Zionism is practically supporting genocide and fascism. As long as you are supporting candidates like Biden, Trump, even RFK, who support Israel fully, you're being complicit in the genocide of these people. And there is no at this point, after 100 days of this, if you are still not caught up in the history, it's because you are willingly being ignorant about the history here. And you're doing it to excuse your own beliefs and your own mumbo jumbo. But it's clear as day here, regardless of what happened on October 7th, regardless of the history, what Israeli occupation is doing to Palestinian people is just cruel, is inhumane, and it's genocide. And I don't need to twist myself in knots to blatantly see that. I don't need to go back in history 75 years to clarify that, or back to October 7th. It's important to know the history, to know the context, to understand why it's all happening. But it's not that important to see that if you have any kind of a moral compass, compassion, or humanity towards any kinds of people, which if you do, then you should have it for all people equally, that then you should be against this occupation and against what Israeli occupation, the IDF, is doing to the Palestinian people. So as I repeat, if at this point in your life you are still supporting either Trump, Joe Biden, or RFK, people that blatantly support the Zionist mission of Israel, then what you are doing is you are being complicit with genocide. And this is something that people like MLK would have agreed with. If you're enacting or if your silence is complicity. Okay. Not much more to add on to that. We add on every week to these articles. So there has already been a lot said, and there's plenty that this article already said. In regards to the women-led resistance, because it's International Women's Day, yeah, of course, women are just as important as any other people because they play an important role. There is no such thing as men being better than women. We all play important roles, and we can all interchange or exchange roles. But as this article mentions, liberal feminism is the trap that actually buries these women, that diverts the blame and makes poor women or minority women seem weaker. What liberal feminism is people like Hillary Clinton in power, bombing places like Libya and bringing back slave labor or slave camps. That's what liberal feminism is. Just women climbing up the corporate ladders, being just as greedy as men. That is not true feminism. That is nowhere near as constructive as socialist feminism, which is about empowering everybody equally from all backgrounds of life, all socioeconomic levels, all classes, and all orientations. Cool. All right, let's move along. That was a long article. Let's see here. Abolish U.S. veto power in the UN Security Council. This one should be good. Getting a little warm here. All right, let's see. Abolish U.S. veto power in the UN Security Council by Benjamin Sinovich, March 7th, 2024. And the photo is a meeting of the United Nations Security Council. Credit Flickr United Nations photo. All right, let me take a sip for this one as well. Also, I'm going to all right, and we read along. On March 1st, the United States blocked an Algerian-led effort within the United Nations Security Council to condemn Israel for the horrific massacre of Palestinians in Gaza, desperately seeking humanitarian aid in the middle of the night on February 29th. Out of the 15 members of the UN Security Council, the United States was the only country not to back a statement of the horrific flower massacre, which led to over 100 casualties after the Israeli military opened fire on a crowd collecting flour and others scarce resources from aid trucks. The images of the Biden administration's UN ambassador, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, and Robert Wood have become infamous for their lone raised hands, using U.S. veto power to shield its imperial outpost of Israel from global condemnation, as virtually all other members of the UN attempt to condemn or speak out against the horrific acts of Israeli forces in Gaza. Is that in this little picture? I don't see it. Oh yeah, there they are over there. Total ghouls here. All right. And we read on. Yet through the existence of the UN, the U.S. mission has continually, Yet throughout the existence of the UN, the U.S. mission has continually exploited its veto power to assert its dominance over the world. Below are 6 of the other key moments the United States used its UN veto to either reject the sovereignty of oppressed peoples or otherwise protect the most reactionary and oppressive regimes from international accountability. Number 1, ceasefire resolution in Gaza. More than 150 days into Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, UN member states have made 3 separate efforts to put forward a ceasefire resolution to a vote, once through the General Assembly and twice through the Security Council. At every instance, and even when its closest Western partners have either voted for or abstained, the United States has vetoed each effort calling for a permanent suspension of violence in Gaza. The UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres has criticized the U.S. mission's usage of their veto as paralyzing the international body from taking any meaningful action on the crisis in Gaza. Guterres also invoked a rarely used Article 99 of the United Nations Charter, which confers on the Secretary General the power to bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter which in her opinion, may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. End quote. Days after blocking the second post-October 7 ceasefire vote on December 8th, the Biden State Department declared it would bypass Congress to rush through 45,000 tank shells to the Israeli military so it could further its genocide, making it clear that Washington plays a direct role in continuing the genocide for Palestinians in Gaza. Number 2, Panama's sovereignty over its canal. On March 21, 1973, the United States used its veto power for the 3rd time since the foundation of the Security Council. The question that the resolution sought to resolve was a new Panama Canal Treaty that would offer greater and meaningful sovereignty to Panama over its canal. It was intended to replace the Haibunau-Barria Treaty of 1903, which granted Washington the right to build and operate in perpetuity a canal across the Panamanian Isthmus. The then ambassador John Hay, who negotiated the eponymous 1903 treaty, was a fervent supporter of the racist and colonial Monroe Doctrine. Hay infamously described the Spanish-American War, which saw the early imperial claims by Washington on Cuba and the Philippines, as a splendid little war. Quote, splendid little war, end quote. While the U.S. mission to the UN described the resolution as, quote, unbalanced and incomplete and therefore subject to serious misinterpretation, end quote, the resolution was supported by all other members of the Security Council at the time, including U.S. allies Australia and France, the latter being a permanent member of the Security Council. Number 3, condemning Israeli occupation of Palestine. While the United States has used its veto power more in the last 5 months than the first 2 decades of the UN's existence, its exploitation of the veto has largely been a tool used to specifically defend Israel's aggression throughout the decades. As of the February 20 ceasefire resolution vote in the Security Council, the United States has used the veto power to defeat resolutions critical of Israel 45 times. That is exactly half of the times they have used their power since the 1945 creation of the UN. 33 of the veto resolutions were related to the illegal Israeli occupation of Palestine. Prior to 1972, the veto was used rarely by the United States, but the pattern was broken by that year after the Security Council attempted a passage of a resolution that condemned Israel's unprovoked bombings of Syria and Lebanon in September 1972, put forward by Guinea, Guinea, Somalia, and Yugoslavia. After this, it became common for the United States to disrupt any international efforts to hold Israel accountable for illegal aggression on Palestine, Lebanon, and others within the region between 1982 and 1990. Washington utilized its veto in support of Israel 21 times and 14 times since just 2001. Number 4, expelling apartheid-era South Africa from UN. Similar to its present-day support of apartheid Israel, the United States long held its support for the apartheid system in South Africa and found the government in Pretoria to be a chief ally and imperial outpost in quashing the anti-colonial and liberation movements sweeping the African continent from the 1970s to the 1980s. Between 1974 and 1988, the U.S. government vetoed resolutions relating to South Africa's apartheid system and military aggression towards African countries 15 times. On October 30, 1974, the United States, along with former colonial forces in Africa, France, and Britain, vetoed a resolution in the Security Council to expel South Africa from the UN due to its apartheid policies. The resolution cited South Africa's quote, constant violation of the principles of the Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, end quote, as well as its refusal to withdraw military forces from sovereign Namibia lands as grounds for South Africa's expulsion, put forward by Kenya, Mauritania, and Cameroon. It was supported by the broad majority of Security Council members, including permanent members, the Soviet Union, and China. In an attempt by Benin, Libya, and Mauritius in Mauritius in October 1977 to impose economic sanctions and global arms embargo on South Africa, once again the United States joined France and Britain to strike down these efforts. This resulted in the end of the United States shipping enriched uranium for South Africa's Safari 1 research nuclear reactor. Notably, however, this resulted in covert weapons transfers and cooperation with the fellow apartheid regime of Israel. In 1979, Tel Aviv helped test a low-field nuclear device off the coast of South Africa and began secretly building Israel's SAR 4-class missile boats domestically within South Africa after the 1977 Security Council resolution publicly canceled a direct purchase of the boats between the two regimes. Number 5, admission of post-war Vietnam to UN. In 1977, after long and hard-won struggle for national, In 1977, after a long and hard-won struggle of national liberation against colonial and imperial forces of Japan, France, and the United States, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam was admitted to the UN. Yet after experiencing a resounding defeat by the Vietnamese people, the United States went out of their way to thwart several efforts to admit the country into the UN body. The first Security Council draft resolution initiated by the missions of Belarus, China, Guyana, Iraq, Mauritania, Sweden, the USSR, Cameroon, and Tanzania was put forward in early August 1975, several months after the People's Army of Vietnam and National Liberation Front took control of then Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City. The U.S. mission utilized a veto to withhold Vietnam's access to the UN and continued to do so the following month and the following year, eventually with the Carter administration relenting in this crusade. Number 6, sanctioning Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. The colonization of Zimbabwe from the indigenous African population was led by Cecil Rhodes in 1889, when Queen Victoria granted Rhodes Company, the British South African Company, full mineral rights to the region. For nearly the next century, racist white minority rule reigned in the country, largely supported by the British Empire. Shortly after the white minority regime of Ian Smith declared Rhodesia's independence from Britain officially in 1965. A national liberation struggle among the majority black population was launched by leading organization Zimbabwe African National Union led by Robert Mugabe. In March of 1970, the government of Burundi, Nepal, Sierra Leone, Syria, and Zambia put forward a resolution condemning the existence of the racist minority regime, declaring it null and void. Further, it called on all UN member states to void the recognition of white ruled Rhodesia, severing all diplomatic, consular, economic, and military relations with the regime. The United States took this moment to cast its first ever veto in the Security Council, claiming they, quote, found it an impractical step to restrict relations to that extent, end quote. U.S. veto power undemocratic and neo-colonial. The U.S. use of its Security Council veto in practice has been one of the sources, if not the leading source, of inaction towards war crimes and crimes against humanity. Israel's genocide of Gaza and subsequent vetoes by the United States being the most pronounced example. It is time to recognize the undemocratic nature of the Security Council and abolish U.S. veto power. Yeah, it's totally ghoulish. In my analysis, in my opinion, every time the U.S. uses the veto power, it does it because it's about profits. In the end, it's about it's about them having ties, military ties, exporting ties, negotiations, and treaties with these nations and these schools to maintain profits in America. So this idea of freedom, which isn't real here, and democracy, which isn't real here, is just a big farce to maintain the status quo, to keep feeding elitists more money, and at what cost? At the cost of innocent people around the world, as mentioned in this article. So, according to the article, U.S. veto power should be abolished. I totally agree. There's not much else to say about it. But when is the United Nations actually going to charge the U.S. with responsibility and actually expose them for what they are? You know, when are people or in mainstream media or news reporters around the world actually going to mention about how horrific the U.S. is about humanitarian procedures and purposes around the world when it comes to the UN? All right, let's see here. Next article. Oil spill, corporate greed threatens Ohio's waterways. Oh, of course. All right, by Luca Wagner, March 7th, 2024. Let's see this picture here is of Ohio, the Ohio River. All right, let's begin with this one. There is an environmental disaster quietly unfolding in the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland. The Sherwin-Williams Technology Center plant is the source of an oil spill that occurred after the site's generator suffered what the company called an, quote, acute diesel fuel line failure, end quote, on January 22nd. The oil flowed into a storm drain before traveling directly into Cuyahoga River. Sherwin-Williams is a massive corporation primarily known for manufacturing and selling paint. According to a statement released to local media, 60 to 100 gallons of diesel fuel flowed into the Cuyahoga River. Sherwin-Williams did engage in some cleanup, largely by hiring a third-party company called Epico, the same company that profited off the incomplete and insufficient cleanup after the East Palestine derailment. Epico was paid by Sherwin-Williams in an effort to retrieve the remaining diesel fuel in the storm sewer line. Following the spill, the Ohio EPA made the claim that the gallons of diesel in the Cuyahoga River had, quote, no impact to drinking water, end quote. They additionally claimed that there was, quote, no evidence of sheen on the river near the spill, end quote. But according to local environmental activist Eddie Olshansky, who is on the river kayaking at least 5 days a week with his organization Trashfish, Sherwin-Williams has not remediated the issue despite their claims and the claims of the EPA. In videos recently posted by Olshansky's, a sheen from the fuel was still visible on the water. Considering the discrepancy between this and Ohio's EPA's claim that there was no sheen on the river in that area, it makes the EPA's claim that the spill had made no impact to the water dubious at best. Sherwin-Williams has a well-known history of inflicting environmental damage, but it also engages in deliberate oppression of the working class in Cleveland. Sherwin-Williams and class warfare in Cleveland. Sherwin-Williams is one of the largest employers in Cleveland, where its headquarters employs 4,185 workers. The company already engages in practices that target and oppress based on both class and race. In 2020, the company disposed of all its union janitors with combined decades of experience to replace them all with non-union janitors. Ruth Young, a janitor, wrote about this greedy mass firing in Crane's Cleveland business. Young pointed out that all the janitors employed there were Black and Latino. The decision left them all scrambling for employment during the onset of global pandemic. The same year, Sherwin-Williams had to settle for millions with workers in California for non-payment of overtime, meal breaks, and rest periods. Just last month in Dallas, an explosion at a Sherwin-Williams plant endangered the lives of workers. This explosion was no mere accident, but the result of repeat neglect. In its report, OSHA, quote, found 9 violations, including a repeat violation for non-inspecting processing equipment, such as pipes that expose workers to hazards, end quote. Cleveland recently gave the company a $100 million tax abatement for their new headquarters. The interview with Olshansky suggests that the people of Cleveland are getting a terrible deal, as their tax dollars directly benefit Sherwin-Williams, while the company poisons water sources and abuses the working people. Tax dollars even fund these cleanups. Cuyahoga River fires, a legacy. Considering the Sherwin-Williams oil spills in the Cuyahoga River in January, a broader discussion on Ohio's history of environmental disasters, particularly ones resulting from corporate greed, is pertinent. The Cuyahoga River path through Cleveland has long been a site of environmental concern. The United States would not have environmental law as we know it without response to the corporate greed of the Cleveland business community. The Clean Water Act of 1972, a cornerstone of U.S. environmental law, sprung up alongside mass activism in wake of the Cuyahoga River fire in 1969. The event additionally birthed the Environmental Protection Agency. However, as soon as Ronald Reagan took office, not a decade after its creation, the U.S. government began to task of gutting the EPA. The ruling class has done its best to fill it with corrupt administrators and lobbyists from fossil fuel and chemical industries. This corruption continues cropping up with the EPA, and its ability to protect human life and environmental health has been defanged entirely. It has been perfectly reformed by the bourgeois government to be, quote, hemmed in, end quote, as Lenin said in State and Revolution, quote, by the narrow limits set by capitalist exploitation, end quote. In 1922, the Supreme Court ruled that the EPA lacks the authority to, quote, adopt on its own a regulatory scheme, end quote, which caps, quote, carbon dioxide emissions, end quote. The court determined that Congress, a club of political elite who have never had the best interests of the oppressed in mind, would have sole authority to design these regulatory schemes. In 1923, the Supreme Court destroyed the EPA's capacity to guarding water quality. According to Clean Water Action, the court's ruling in Sackett versus EPA left, quote, at least half of our nation's remaining wetlands, end quote, unprotected by the Clean Water Act, while leaving our waters thoroughly unprotected. The court, quote, invented fossil fuel and mining companies, real estate developers, and industrial agriculture to pollute, bulldoze, fill in, or drain these invaluable water resources, end quote. The Supreme Court has determined that the continued mega profits of the ruling class weren't enough, deciding to sacrifice a whole country's health on the altar of corporate greed. The degree to which your local environment is protected is deeply intertwined with issues of class and race. Water, one of life's greatest necessities, has its quality determined along class and race lines in capitalist nations like the United States, with the worst conditions being intentionally relegated to Black and Indigenous communities. Last year, the Supreme Court effectively ruled that the Navajo Nation does not have the right to clean water. A Michigan Civil Rights Commission report said, quote, systemic racism, end quote, was at the root of the Flint, Michigan water crisis. Flint is majority Black, while a United Church of Christ report said that Northeast Ohio's poorest communities are hotspots for environmental injustice. Whether you get access to clean drinking water is determined by the whims of the cruel and racist ruling class and their business interests. Oil spills, such as the one on the Cuyahoga River, explosions, and train derailments are all consequences of profiteering by the bourgeoisie and their venal bureaucrats, and all come at the cost of working class people and their environment. Cleveland and the world's workers and environment will not be safe under capitalism as long as labor is exploited. As long as labor is exploited and the environment's worth is only that of a commodity, safety is an impossibility. The feature photo was the Sherman-Williams headquarters overlooks the Cuyahoga River. It's a liberation photo. This just goes back to the basic conclusion of socialists and communists, which is, and activists and humanitarians, which is that the greed of capitalism always takes precedence over the safety of the people. What they want to do is these corporations don't care about poisoning your water because they know they're just going to get fined, little fines. They don't care about stealing your wages because they know they're just going to get fined a couple of $1 million, which is nothing compared to the millions that they steal from their workers. And they don't care because they see it all as a for-profit business. If you don't have clean water, then they'll sell you water. They'll purify water and they'll sell it to you. So it becomes a commodity. Things like water in the United States should be basic rights. They shouldn't be created into commodities, put into bottles, labeled with all these crazy water labels when they all come out of the same faucet practically. But yeah, these pollutions, these accidents that they call, are from intentional neglect. And I think the long game is for them to create a mistrust in the public of public water, so that people do intentionally buy bottled water. I mean, a lot of people in America now already buy bottled water because they don't trust the tap water. And that is a huge injustice, and it is morally bankrupt to assume or to believe that poor people living in poor neighborhoods should have to buy fresh bottled water from a store. That's not why we created faucet systems and ran pipes all over the United States so that people could buy this water at stores instead, right? So the article very in depth and clear about why this happens. I don't have to add much more to it. It's a strong article. It even says that there's videos of the contaminated water in Ohio. But you don't have to go as far as Ohio. You can go to your public rivers in all of your cities, and you'll notice that most of your rivers are polluted next to your city, and you're not allowed to swim of it because there's safety hazards to swimming in your river. Think about that. The heart, one of the arteries that once like fed your city, you know, this is how your city grew crops. This is how your city maintained the people. You can't really even just drink the water out of the river anymore because it's so polluted. And that's really sad. to think that we live in such a dystopian, already such a dystopian society that we can't even trust what should be clean water from the river that used to be lifelines to your community. Okay, so that's oil spill, corporate greed threatens Ohio's waterways. There's one more here, up here on the top. PSL editorial celebrates International Women's Day by fighting the empire. Okay, let's take a quick look at that one. PSL editorial celebrates International Women's Day by fighting the empire. Liberation Staff, March 8th, 2024. It's a quick 2-minute read. And this will be an important read because unlike liberal feminism, socialist feminism is actually true feminism that actually fights for human rights and equality. All right, let's start the article. Women around the world are leading the struggle against war and colonialism. The International Women's Day, the urgency to rise up against the U.S. war machine and put an end to the horrible crimes it commits against women is more apparent than ever. The genocide being unleashed against the people of Gaza has appalled the world and exposed the total inhumanity of the U.S. government, which acts as a full partner in Israel's killing spree. Let me repeat that. The genocide being unleashed against the people of Gaza has appalled the world and exposed the total inhumanity of the U.S. government, which acts as a full partner in Israel's killing spree. All across the country, people are participating in International Women's Day actions called by the Shut It Down for Palestine movement. These are part of a long history of anti-imperialist activities held to mark the day. Perhaps most famously in 1917, an IWD march against World War I sparked a revolution that brought down the Russian monarchy. The most radical fighters for women's liberations always understood that women could never be free as long as they were under the domination of empire. The indiscriminate and massive bombardment of Gaza has claimed the lives of thousands of women and threatens to kill tens of thousands more as disease and mass starvation looms. Israeli soldiers carry out well-documented acts of sexual violence and intimidation targeting Palestinian women. An often sickeningly post about it themselves on social media. Israeli troops storm maternity wards and terrorize pregnant Palestinian women. Fighting to end this genocide is the duty of all people of conscience around the world. Fighting to end this genocide is the duty of all people of conscience around the world. U.S. military is not only the enemy of women in Gaza, it is the enemy of working-class women here in the United States as well. The desperately needed resources required to address the crisis facing working women are consumed by the Pentagon war machine, amounting to approximately $1 trillion a year. Women workers are finding it harder and harder to make ends meet as prices remain painfully high amid record corporate profits. The government has refused to deliver any real relief from the crushing burden of $1.6 trillion of sudden student debt. The government has refused to deliver any real relief from the crushing burden of $1.6 trillion of student debt, about 2/3 of which they are held by women. The child care system has been kept afloat by subsidies since the onset of the pandemic, but the expiration of this program now threatens to have disastrous consequences for working women. Working class women are routinely denied adequate health care. This issue is intensified by racism in the medical system, and Black women in particular face a maternal mortality crisis. The epidemic of violence against women is continued unchecked, including over 1,000 instances per year of women being killed by an intimate partner. Countless attacks on abortion rights are taking place at the state level in the wake of the outrageous Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, and now far-right politicians and judges are setting their sights on IVF, contraception, and more in their war on reproductive rights. Rather than addressing any of these dire problems, Joe Biden is trying to push legislation through Congress that will allocate another $100 billion to war in Ukraine, genocide in Gaza, and threatening war against China. International Women's Day was founded by leaders who understood that women's equality could never be realized until capitalism was overthrown. This IWD, let's deepen our commitment to fighting against the colonialism and war that is inherent under this rotten system. Okay. So, as described in the article, yeah, if you're a woman and you are fighting for women's right, and you're liberal and you're a feminist, and you think that you can get it done under capitalism, you are highly mistaken, and you are diluting yourself, and uh, and you're practically being complicit in your own demise, practically, or the demise of working class women, minority women. Um, the liberal feminism, like I said, is a feminism that is toxic, that talks about women just getting that cash, that talks about women hustle culture, women in power. What is power? What is the point of women equality in a liberal system where they call it equality when you can put women in power of bombing other women, like people like Albright, or like people like Hillary Clinton, that bombed Libya, that was in charge of bombing Libya, destabilizing that nation, that country, and practically bringing back sex labor, uh, what do you call it, slave labor back to their country. Um, so, yeah, full solidarity here with socialist women, feminism. And I hope people actually are getting this more now. Now that all these wars that are adding up, right? The the mask is off. People like Joe Biden are clearly not fighting for people. People like Obama did not keep his promises, like codifying Roe v. Wade, like giving us um, single payer healthcare systems. Instead, they created backdoors so that eventually, when Republicans came in power, they would be able to take these rights away, or they would be able to defang or detooth these policies, right? So this is my idea of when I say, uh, if you keep voting or electing these corporate puppets, you're just enabling the ratchet effect of capitalism, where you take one step forward and two step backs every few years. You get worse options, you get a worse economy. Your dollar isn't as valuable as it used to be. So yeah, the inflation has meant that most people are making like $15 an hour, but $15 an hour isn't even worth enough for a full-time worker to buy a home or buy a car or raise a family. Don't forget there was a time in America where one person could have one basic full-time job, buy a home, buy a car, raise the two children, and the mom would be able to stay home, or vice versa, right? Nowadays, you're lucky if one minimum wage full-time job will pay you enough for you to uh, pay rent in a decent apartment and afford health insurance and afford your car payments. So, um, in regards to feminism here, during the international women's movement, fully in support of a socialist feminism, uh, as opposed to a liberal capitalist feminism, which is just a ruse to maintain the status quo and to maintain the establishment in power. Okay. That seems to be it for today. Let's see here. Okay. So we've had a good chat today. Feel free to follow the links in the description. Have an excellent weekend and keep reading these articles. Goodbye.